In this video, we are going to discuss how we can create a service so that we can access the pod that we just created in our earlier video. So if you remember about the services, we already discussed about services in our earlier section of this course about the theoretical aspect of the service, like how service is one of the static way of accessing all the pods which are being deployed within our Kubernetes cluster. So this is the theoretical part. As you can just recollect, the service is an abstract way to expose an application running on a set of pods as a network service. So with Kubernetes, you don't need to modify your application to use an unfamiliar service discovery mechanism. Kubernetes gives pods their own IP address and the single DNS name for a set of pods and can load balance across them. So that's the whole power of the service itself. And the reason being, Kubernetes pods are mortal and they are burned, and when they die, they are not resurrected. So if you use deployment to run your app, it creates the destroyed pod dynamically. And once the pod is being created dynamically, then it's going to have its own different IP address. So you can't really actually communicate with its own IP address. So I will quickly show you what I really mean in here. So I'm going to show you that there is an IP address for communicating with our cluster using this particular IP, as we saw in our earlier video. And I'm going to quickly, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to expose this particular pod that is currently running within my Kubernetes cluster. So you can see this is the pod which is currently running. So I'm just going to expose this, which is not a good way of doing it, but I'm just doing it for the demonstration, and I will show you what I really mean. So I'm just going to do kubectl of expose of pod, and I'm going to call this as maybe Selenium Hub. That's the name of the pod. So I'm just going to be exposing it, and I'm just going to create a service this time. I'm going to call this as hub service, something like that. So this is the service which is exposing our pod which is running in our Kubernetes cluster. And then I'm just going to specify a target port as 4444. And I'm going to say type is equal to node port. So this is very important. You need to specify what type of the port is, whether it is a node port or a load balancing and stuff. So I'm just going to specify node port at this point, and then I'm going to hit enter. So you can see it says that, all right, so this service is currently being exposed. So you can still do something like kubectl get svc, which is going to show you all the services which is currently running. So there is going to be a default service, which is nothing but the Kubernetes API server. This is the one which we used to talk right now with the kubectl command with the API server running within the Kubernetes cluster in the MiniCube. Yeah, that's what it is. So just ignore this guy right now. But this one is the one that we just created. You can see it has a node port type, and this is the cluster IP address, which is going to be like a dynamic IP address. You don't worry about it. And this is the port that we specified to internal port to be exposed to this particular port. So you can see this is the port number that we should be looking for this time while we communicate with it. And we already know the IP address of our cluster by just doing something like this. So we already saw that in our earlier video, but just for the sake, just to recollect what I really mean, I'm just going to do something like kubectl get nodes. So you can see that I get the MiniCube. So I can even describe the node here, something like this. And you can see there is going to be an internal IP address or something like that. There you go. So this is the internal IP address, which is exactly matching the one that I just copy pasted. And then in here, I'm just going to paste the port number that I just copied over there. And if I hit enter, there you go. You can see that we have our Selenium Hub that we just created in the pod in our earlier video. So this is how we can access a pod using the service in Kubernetes. So this is very, very simple, and this is how you can actually get access to a pod which is being running within your Kubernetes cluster. And again, if you remember in our earlier video, we also discussed something called as MiniCube Dashboard. That's one way that you can actually see the pod which is running in a graphical user interface. So you can do something like MiniCube of dashboard, hit enter. So that's going to open, oops, it says that I should be opening that as an administrator mode. So I don't really, I'm not currently running this particular PowerShell in administrator mode. So I can probably run this as an admin mode. And I'm going to do something like MiniCube of Dashboard. There you go. You can see that it opens up and Kubernetes UI, and it shows me the cluster, which is nothing but the Selenium Hub that we just created. And once I click this guy, it shows me the details of this particular hub. And again, this is the only pod which is currently running. You can see this is the pod information, and you can also see the log information of that particular pod. You can see it shows me all those details in here. Pretty cool, right? So this is the Selenium Hub which is currently running. So this way you can actually access this particular pod that just you have created. And again, this way that you are seeing in here that we have did with the command prompt is not something the right way of exposing and port for a service itself. The best way is to do it declaratively, which is nothing but how we did in the YAML file in our pods creation. So you can see that we already have this pod in a declarative fashion in the YAML file. Similarly, we can do the same thing for the service itself. So what we can do is, this time I'm just going to create a new file or the YAML file. I'm going to call this as services.yaml. And in here, as we know that this particular tool is very, very intelligent, you can just type SE and there you go. You get all the syntax for the Kubernetes services. This is very, very handy, seriously. So I'm just going to hit enter. There you go. And you get the complete structure or the skeleton of the service that you need to be typing. So I'm just going to call this particular service name maybe as Selenium Hub. I mean, don't worry about it. You can also call this as Selenium SRV. And for the selector of the app, you need to specify the Selenium Hub basically. So you're going to specify the Selenium Hub in here because that's the application that we should be pointing, the pods that we have just created, right? So I'm just going to specify the Selenium Hub in here. And then we need to specify the port number. So the port number is going to be 444, which is being exposed by the hub. And then we need to specify the type of this particular port. So for that, I'm just going to type something called as type as node port. That's it. And this way it's going to be a node port that we just specified in a command line. And just for the sake, instead of giving the dynamic IP address port number that we used to get from here, and then we find it, all those stuffs, which is kind of very, very painful, right? So we got this particular dynamic port number every time. Instead of getting this particular port number, we can specify the port number that we should be looking for. That we can do something called as node port. And then there is a range of this particular node port. Basically, it should be starting from 30,000 to 60,000, I guess. So I'm just going to specify that, which is going to be 30,001 this time. And that's it. So this is the service that we should be looking for, right? So this is the service.yaml file, which is going to be doing it for us. You can also specify the label in here if you want. So you can specify the labels as something like labels of the app name as Selenium SRV. So now you can actually run this particular service and see how it actually works with accessing the pods. But again, using the service for accessing the pod is not the right way, because you don't really have to access a pod directly, even with a service, or even if you try using the service to access the pod, this is not the right way of doing it. Because in Kubernetes world, you don't have to directly communicate with the pod. Rather, you can either communicate with the service or with the replication controllers and deployments that we already discussed in our earlier videos of this different section, which is section 1. So make sure that you don't really use this way of using or accessing the pod that we showed you earlier in this video. Rather, we can actually use what is called as a replication controller or the deployments to make this happen, which we'll be discussing in our next video, and see how we can make use of the service to communicate with the deployments and understand how things work.